All right. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Wealth Building for Dummies podcast. My name is Kyle Demian. I'm joined with my usual co-host, Renji Matthew. And today on our podcast, we're going to be talking about the concept of syndication and how you can use it if you are wanting to start your own syndication or your own fund, or how you can tap into and leverage other people's syndication models and what the benefits are to doing that. So as always, we love to talk about building wealth, getting into assets, and creating passive income. And Renji, syndication is one of the strongest ways that people can do that, right? And I think most people know of syndication from like the real estate model, but that's not necessarily, all that's out there. So can you give us a rundown and kind of an overview of what is syndication and how it works?
Yeah, so all syndication is, layman's term, it's a fund that someone starts because they might not have the capital that they need to go invest into, in this example, let's say real estate. Like you said, that's the most common syndication. So let's say I, as a business owner that owns rental properties, I want to get into multifamilies and apartment complexes, but I don't have the capital. So I start a syndication or a fund that people can invest into, and I'll use that to go buy multiple, apartments or whatever, depending on how much money I have invested from investors. And with that, I would give that and those investors back a certain percentage, or there's different ways to set up a syndication, which we'll talk about here. But I would give them some type of return. But they also get the tax benefits because they're invested, even though not directly, they're invested into real estate, right? And for me, it benefits me because I'm able to buy the properties that I wasn't able to before. But I'm doing it as a group with the group of people, so I'm coming with a stronger position to be able to invest into bigger units and more units than I would have been on my own. So that's the power of syndication. There's so many different ways to do it, which we'll talk about on here. But one of the most common ones is people put money into an escrow account, and that's where it's invested from. Because with an escrow account, you have the protection. So you, as the investor that's giving them the money, it's protected. And me, as the syndicator, know how much money's in there. I can take out how much I need to go invest whenever a property comes up. But yeah, let's talk about some. And like Kyle mentioned, there are syndications outside of real estate, similar to what Camboge Ventures is doing with the 5% model, or with e-commerce, different things. So the most common syndications you'll hear is with real estate, because that's what everyone's trying to get into, is buying properties, not only because of the cash flow, but also because of the tax benefits.
Yeah, and that's one of the key points I think that most people don't realize is, number one, the whole idea of syndication is leverage. Whether you're the one that wants to pool together, investors or money from investors to go out and to make some of these larger investments, or if you are one of the investors and maybe you're busy already running your own business, or maybe you have other assets, and you're like, hey, I want to get into real estate, but you truly want to make it passive, then you just have to find people or find the right, syndication or the right groups where they're actually going out and doing these type of deals. And so that's great. That's great. And now you mentioned there's a few different types, and there's a few different types of like partners that can be involved too. Why don't you go into that and more so how it works?
Yeah, so there's ones where, like I said, if I was a syndicator or the person that's started the fund, there's limited partnerships and controlling partnerships or growth partnerships, whatever you want to call it there. Different people call it different things, but the difference is me as a syndicator, if I'm doing that partnership thing, the investor that's bringing in the money will be the limited partner, meaning they don't have control over what the money is invested in. In this scenario, if it's real estate, we know it is real estate. And you give them certain criteria of the type of properties you will get into and all of that stuff, but they don't and that's before they invest. You're telling them, hey, what type of properties you're investing in, so that they know what properties you will get into, and all of that. But they don't have control over what you invest in or how you do your business. Technically, they just invest the money. But most syndications, they might have 20-80 split, where the limited partner or the one that's investing the money has the 80 percentage, or it might be a 70-30. I've also talked to people where they do 50-50. But the syndicator or the controlling partner or growth partner, whatever you want to call it, has the ability to go invest into the actual property. They're the ones that manage it, or use someone to manage it, or fix up the property, does all the work for you. But the investor, they don't have to do anything. They're just investing the money, right? And even that side, you have to, depending on the syndication, you have to figure out if you are an accredited investor or a non-accredited investor. And there's so many rules behind it with the SEC and everything, but the basic way to explain it: an accredited investor, you own at least 1 million in assets, and that could be in real estate, that could be just cash in your bank, it could be 401ks, IRA, whatever it is. 1 million in assets, and you make a certain amount of income a year. So again, depending on the syndication, they might have different rules. But most common one is you have to be making at least 200,000 a year. Some are 250. It just depends on the syndication. But that's an accredited investor. A non-accredited investor is anyone under that 1 million in assets. So this could be people that are making anywhere from nothing a year to 200,000 or whatever. So the thing is, you have to have money to be able to invest. And then most syndications have a lower limit on how much you can invest to get into it, right? So I've seen ones where you have to put in at least 25,000, but then I've also seen ones where you have to start at a minimum of 250, and that's where they only take on accredited investors. So there's so many different ones out there. Now, if you're talking about the types of syndication, there's four most common ones, and we can go into those. Like the most common, simplest ones: you're investing money, you're getting a certain percentage back every year. So let's say you put in 100,000, and I, as a syndicator, go and use that multiple times in the course of that year, but I give you back a 10% return every year. Which, if you're getting 10% every year, that's good returns, because you're getting it consistently every year compared to the market, stock market, right? So, but I flip that money so many times to get into so many properties. That's one way. Another way is you invest the money, you're getting equity in the property. You don't get cash flow necessarily, but you get equity. This one's more of a long-term play. So this is for people that don't need the cash flow right away, but that property could grow in value in the next 3, 4, 5 years. Now, when we refinance or sell the property, you're going to get bigger, because if you own 70 or 80% of the property, you're going to get a bigger chunk of than what you invested to start with. Then there's syndications where you get best of everything. Like, you invest money into it depending on how much you own of the percentage of the property. So let's say you put in 100,000, just to keep math simple, and the property is worth 1 million. You own 10% of that property, right? So depending on all the investors that come in, they will all own percentages. So your cash flow will depend on that percentage. And that could be every month, every quarter, semi-annual, or annual. It just depends on how the controlling partners have it set up. But you also get the tax benefits of being in that property, but it's a percentage again. And there's some syndications where it's everything I just mentioned, but then when they refinance, you get a percentage out of that, and then now you can put it back in, and it's like your original wasn't taken out. So there's so many different ways out there. It just depends on what works best for you, what you're looking for. Because if you're looking for strictly cash flow, that first one that I mentioned makes sense, right? And I just mentioned 10% as a basic one, but there's people that are paying way more, right? So if you want equity and don't really necessarily need the cash flow, then the equity model might make more sense. So it just depends on what you're looking for. And that's just the real estate syndications. there's stuff out there that, like we said, outside of real estate, the returns could be more, could be less, depending on what you're invested in.
Yeah, for sure. And like you mentioned, I mean, there's groups of people that go in on businesses all the
Mm-hmm.
time, and you'll see that they have multiple owners. I mean, that's a form of a syndication. They may not call it
Technically,
that, but
yeah.
yeah, technically it is, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
we always talk about, there's different levels to the money game. And this is just one of them, where
Yep.
typically you do have to be an accredited investor where you have over $1
Mm-hmm.
million of, net worth. And that's how you start getting access to some of these different
Yep.
investments. But not all funds, not all syndications require that. Although,
Yep.
I guess one could say, this is like, I guess, a riskier investment because multiple reasons, right? Multiple things. But at the end of the day, this whole podcast is intended to be educational and informational. This is not financial advice. Always seek out, and work one-on-one with somebody anytime you are,
Yep.
looking at different investment options and things to grow and build your wealth, right? But with that, Renji, you talked on number one. You're the one that knows way more about syndications than I do. So I'm glad you've kind of covered everything so far. So that's been good. But I think the last thing here that we can kind of touch on is, how do people find syndications, and or, is there anything that they should specifically be looking at?
So you can Google like real estate funds, syndications, different things like that. There's so many out there. That's the thing, and there's a
Mm,
couple that we would recommend. And if you're in our school community, we'll talk about it in there too. But there's so many out there. The most common one, or the most yeah, the one that most people have heard of is Grant Cardone's Cardone Capital. That's one a lot of people have heard of because he's out on social media everywhere. So people
yeah,
have heard of that one. But there's so many out there. Any person could start a syndication and and grow their real estate portfolio, right? So there's so many out there. And like I said, there are several that we like to work with. Cambodia's one. There's different ones out there that we would recommend. But yeah, I think it's one of those things. It just depends on how you mesh with the owners and what type of syndication you want to work with, right? At the end of the day, it's all about using other people's money. That's all it is. That's what the wealthy do. That's what the syndicators
hmm
are doing. They don't have the money to be able to invest. They could build up to that, but even when they have the money, they still use other people's money because that's the whole point of what a wealthy person does. They use other people's money. Even if you're using banks' money, that's still using other people's money, right? So
yep.
you just want to find a group that, I guess, ethics and ideals go along with what you like, and you like the way they do business. It makes sense to work with them then.
And you like what they're investing in. I
Exactly.
know the couple of syndications we've looked at, like you can actually see what they're putting their money in, and how it's gonna, kind of
Exactly.
work, and how your money is going to work. So I
Yep.
think that's important as well, is to
Yep.
check that out. And so with that, Renji, I think short, easy episode. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up? I mean, I think we kept it pretty simple.
Yeah.
And anything else?
Yeah, I think this is just the basics, guys. There's
Yeah.
so much you can go into. Like, do your own research, and like Kyle said, don't just listen to us, right? This is just educational. We're not giving you financial advice. Depending on the state you're in, there's so many different rules. So it's good to meet with the real estate lawyer because they can tell you all the rules. And that's one of the things we did when we first got into real estate, thought about syndication. We met with some real estate lawyers, and they can tell you, hey, depending on your state, the rules might be this way or that way. But then there's ways to do it where it's common in all the states too, and that's where a lot of the big investors that invest in all over the country, they use the escrow accounts, stuff like that. But there's different rules to it, so always seek that kind of advice from, like, hire a lawyer or talk to someone that knows what they're doing. Don't just listen to us and go do it. Again, this is just educational. We just kept it basic and simple. So yeah, either join our school community, we can go into more details, or seek out legal advice to figure out how to do the right thing or how to go about if you're wanting to start a syndication. Again, every syndicator out there, the only reason they did it is because they didn't have their own funds and they wanted to grow their business huge. They started a fund. And that's how syndications have started. And you might not have heard of it as syndication, but that's technically what it is. Like Kyle mentioned before, it's all funds that people start to go invest big.
Absolutely. I love that. And if you guys made it to the end of this video, what are you doing if you're not subscribed to us by now? This is our 101st podcast episode, I believe.
Crazy.
And I know, isn't it? We had started about a year ago, and here we are. We're still going. So we survived the 30 episode barrier that most podcasts fail to make it past. But
thank you guys for
so
staying
much
with us.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you guys for hanging out with us. Thank you guys for subscribing. If you made it to the end of the video, make sure to like it below. And then below this, we'll also have a link to our school community where you guys can get access to the syndications and the funds that we are investing in and putting our money in, and also other ones that we're vetting out and providing to people and showing them what options are out there and available. So with that, we'll see you guys on the next episode. Take care.